Welcome to my simple domestic thoughts about the beloved Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Damodar Modi. In this video, I want to express my concerns as well as admiration for one of the most distinctive and much touted characteristics of the Prime Minister, namely that he works extremely hard. Reportedly, he works 18 hours a day normally, and in extraordinary situations, as exigencies demand, perhaps he would work even more. And the amazing thing is that despite this extreme busyness, he looks remarkably fresh and crisp every time. I've never seen Modi ji tired or washed out or exhausted or looking sleepy, groggy, or grumpy. He's always the same person, eternally the same yesterday, today, and forever. This is something that I really admire about him. But as regards the extreme busyness that he maintains, the impossibly high volume of work he takes upon himself, and the very long hours of work he puts in, which he does not have to, but he does. And presumably, out of love for the country, out of his passionate eagerness to do his very best for the country, which is certainly very laudable. All of us are beholden to him for the exemplary devotion that he brings to bear on his service to the nation. However, to every bright side, there is also a not so bright side. There is a flip side. And intellectual integrity demands that we not only look at the familiar and the celebrated, the obvious and the much sung about, uh, we must also look at what is often ignored, either by design or by default. Uh, and that is precisely what I hope to do in this video. And I do so without any preconceived notion about anyone, without any axe to grind. My thoughts are essentially the thoughts of a teacher whose job it is to think on contemporary issues and, if possible, to promote a culture of thinking rationally, impartially, and objectively. I pray that I be granted the divine grace to do so, particularly in this video. What's my concern about the Prime Minister maintaining this impossibly high and punishing pace of work? Now, if a person works 18 hours a day or 20 hours a day, let's say 18 hours a day, which is the minimum as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, he's left with exactly 6 hours to fit in everything else into. These 6 hours must accommodate his sleep, his food, his yoga, and maybe he spends a little time catching up with the media, who knows. Maybe he has a fleeting word with somebody dear and near to him. Maybe he makes a phone call or receives a phone call. Maybe he finds 5 to 6 minutes or even less 3 minutes to make a noting in his diary so that eventually it could become a world celebrated book like the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Who knows? So it's a punishing pace of work. Prima facie looks very good, very commendable, very heroic, very noble, and no doubt it is. But there is a flip side. And I invite you very humbly, and I invite also, I very reverentially invite Modi ji to find 5 minutes to listen to my concerns for him. What is the concern I have here? Now, when a person works extremely hard, when a person burns at both ends with a zeal for public service, uh, there is a high risk that in his absorption with the very mechanism of what he is doing, he could become progressively blind to the meaning of what he is doing. Or to put it differently, one's outlook, one's concern, one's scale of evaluation becomes entirely quantitative and less qualitative. Now, given who we are as human beings, both quality and quantity matter to us. We cannot belittle quantity. I'm not someone who would believe that, only small is beautiful. I'm free to see beauty even in the larger things of life. I certainly appreciate the value of quantity. But quantity becomes and remains valuable only if the balance between quantity and quality is maintained. So, even as quantity improves, quality must improve correspondingly or proportionately. Otherwise, quantity begins to be counterproductive. I hope Sri Narendra Modi pays some heed to this principle. Now, let me use an illustration to make my meaning clear. I'm reminded of a tragedy that took place in Trivandrum Medical College, where a lady was being operated on. It was a fairly simple surgery, cesarean section. The surgeon was competent, the anesthetist was fairly experienced. The surgery began, but unfortunately, the patient died. The patient died for a very simple reason, but that reason turned out to be fatal, life threatening. What was the reason? The anesthetist was not mindful of, or he did not pay sufficient attention to the inflow of oxygen into the lady being operated upon, as a result of which her brain did not receive the usual or the required quantity of oxygen, and the terrible consequence was that she became brain dead. The surgeon was doing an outstanding job. He was an extremely conscientious doctor, highly qualified, extremely hardworking. There was nothing wrong with the anesthetist. There was nothing wrong with the medical equipment, the technology in use, the medicines in use. Just one thing: inadequate attention paid to something which is quantitatively significant. After all, what's the weight of the oxygen that a patient needs during a 45 minutes long surgery? So, nothing actually. But that determines the difference between life and death for a human being. I'm afraid this is true not only of human beings but also of every society, every nation. And it occurs to me to think that this is an aspect to which Sri Narendra Modi, for all his commendable enthusiasm for the country and his willingness to serve his heart out to take India forward, has lost sight of. Somehow, his very busyness, his self immolation through work, if I may put it drastically, prevents him from ensuring that the right amount of oxygen is flowing into the brains, the body of the country. And that oxygen is love. Love alone can ensure the health and vitality of a country or a society. Love alone can ensure or maintain the unity of a people who are necessarily diverse in their backgrounds, in their tastes, in their religions, in their languages, in their food habits, in, uh, in every respect. Love alone has the ability to make people or enable people transcend superficial differences and intuit the deep unity that necessarily must exist in order for a country to survive. As Abraham Lincoln said, divided, united we stand, divided we fall. But then, when there is no love, unity will be misunderstood as uniformity, which breeds highly toxic intolerance towards diversity, which in practical terms means that I am allergic to anyone who is in any respect different to me. Now, that is sick. I have to put it with all the emphasis that I can muster. This is sick. And I'm afraid this sickness is eating into the vitals of our country. And no matter what precautionary measures are taken, no matter how hard the state is policed, no matter how foolproof the technology of surveillance and the instruments of surveillance put in place are, no matter what degree of vigilance is exercised by concerned authorities, the life threatening consequences of the oxygen flow of love into the body of the country, into the brain of the country, cannot be averted. It will surface sooner than later. And if we have any love for the country left in us, we'll keep drumming this idea, keep proclaiming it from the rooftop, because ignoring this is dangerous, it is suicidal. Now, a leader who leads a country as large and diverse as India is cannot really be expected to pay attention to all the minute details of everything that goes on. Fair enough. No one would ever dispute that it should be otherwise. Now, if the work is too much, then the importance of prioritization comes up. So, it is necessary, if the vitality, the health of the country is to be ensured and enhanced, the Prime Minister of the country needs to prioritize the focal points of his attention. The trick in leadership lies in deciding what the supreme leader should himself handle, work at, decide, push forward, and what he can delegate to others. Unfortunately, this seems to be a weakness in Mr. Modi's character, and this weakness stems from his strength. His strength is the ability to assume responsibility for everything and to push himself hard to deliver. But that also means that he becomes less and less appreciative of the potentialities and talents in others, and therefore becomes increasingly reluctant to decentralize work. And if work is not decentralized, work cannot be prioritized. Crucial work, which must receive the minutest attention of the supreme leader, may be unwittingly neglected, or it may come to his notice a little too late, by which time the patient would have suffered brain death, irreversible brain death. That's why I say that I can only pray that Sri Narendra Damodar Modi would pay heed to the rhythm of work. God, in His mercy, has appointed an inalienable, indefeasible rhythm to human life. It's a rhythm between work and rest. Why is rest important? Rest is not vacuity of mind. Rest is a mere standing apart from the desperate hurry and rush of life so as to be able to reflect on, contemplate on the direction and the meaning of the work being done, and to do so critically so as to ensure that the most important ingredients, which are sometimes apt to be neglected or lost sight of, are all there in the equation. If not, as I said, the patient could die of uh, brain hypoxia, that is, brain death due to inadequate supply of oxygen. In order to illustrate this point from another angle, let me give you an experience of mine. With that, I close. About a couple of years ago, I planted a passion fruit plant. Passion fruit. As a family, we are very fond of passion fruit. I'm sure my viewers are familiar with passion fruit. We are not fond of the passion fruit, not because we are a very passionate people, or are we? God alone knows, but because it's a very nice, uh, tasty, succulent fruit. We make good squash with it, apart from using it as a fruit itself. It's very rich in vitamin C, it's very strong in taste, and if it's properly ripe, it is sweet. It has a very unique flavor. So I planted an additional passion fruit plant. It came up very well. For a whole year, it was growing very fast, very enthusiastically. But one day, when I went and looked at it with some degree of expectation, God has given me this very special state of being able to establish a kind of connection of energy fields with life in nature. So I go near the plants and I stand there and I maybe touch the plants or I sort of mentally intuit how they are and all that. So one day when I was doing it with respect to this passion fruit creeper, I saw a wild creeper growing up very fast. So I said, "Hey, that's very interesting. I didn't plant it. How did it come there?" So I said, "Okay, let it be." A week passed, 2 weeks passed, 1 month passed, 2 months passed, and then I found that this wild creeper was outgrowing my passion fruit tree. It was becoming far more luxuriant. And it so seemed to me, I could have been wrong. In fact, in retrospect, I realized that I was indeed wrong. It seemed to me at that time that this fast growing, very lusty, strong, wild creeper would suck up all the nutrients from the soil, and my poor passion fruit plant will be starved of death, and therefore it will not live to produce a single fruit. So I felt sorry for my passion fruit plant. It's being suffocated by this wild creeper. So I decided to intervene. What did I do? I fetched a pair of garden scissors, sharp, and I very smartly slit the stem of this wild creeper. I thought I had done a great service to my passion fruit plant. Uh, Overnight, nothing much happened. The next day I came. The wild creeper had begun to droop and dry up. The next day, nothing much happened. Then I did not look at my passion fruit plant for 2 or 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, when I came back to see how my favorite passion fruit plant was doing, my heart broke that my passion fruit plant had withered away. This is no exaggeration, my dear friends. I felt a chord snap in my heart. I actually felt bereaved. I stood there grieving over my passion fruit plant. The passion fruit plant that died young because of my cruel care for its own well being. What had happened was as follows: this wild creeper came up on its own, but in the process of growing up, it had struck a deep friendship with my passion fruit plant. They were growing up together. And when I cut away the wild creeper, my poor passion fruit plant was left alone, lonely, cold, sad, bereaved. And the sorrow of it was too much for my poor little passion fruit plant to bear. It died away. I commend this actual experience to my cherished friend Narendra Damodar Modi. It's not enough that we act out of good intentions. My intention was absolutely above blame, blameless in protecting my passion fruit plant from the parasitical burden of the wild creature that I feared would suck away all the nutrients and cause my plant to starve. But I didn't realize that my passion fruit plant needed not only food but also friendship, companionship. My plant looked very different from the wild creeper, and the wild creeper looked very different from my plant. But that difference did not prevent them from becoming good and deep friends. I'm reminded of the Hindu Muslim relationship through this experience of mine. It made me reflect, meditate very deeply. Perhaps Mahatma Gandhi was absolutely on the ball when he said, Muslims and Hindus, or Hindus and Muslims, are like two eyes of Mother India. We do not help one eye by gouging out the other. We actually ruin the felicity of Bharat Mata's eyesight. It doesn't make a pretty picture to see Mother India one eyed. So, ultimately, history will judge a leader not in terms of the quantity of work he does, but in terms of his vision, in terms of the wisdom with which he serves the country, in terms of his capacity to discern what is absolutely central and basic from that which is peripheral, his capacity to mind matters of the soul even as he goes about feeding the body of the country. Progress is not merely the swelling up of the body. Development or progress of a country must also be the enlargement and the enhancement of the mind and the enlargement of the soul. A tiny, shrinking mind, a desiccated soul in an inflated body is a sight of abomination. It's a sight of abomination. I'm afraid this crudity is now beginning to show itself in our public life. I don't want to go into details because it is extremely unpleasant, and also because it is unnecessary, in as much as practically everybody is touched by it, affected by it one way or another, and at any rate is daily on display in our newspaper so called prime time discussions, where representatives or spokespersons of parties come and dish out their boorishness to the unfortunate public, people who have no other choice but to listen to this kind of stage managed, boorishly choreographed incivility and poverty in mental culture. So, if the greatness of India is to be realized for the sake of humanity at large, Narendra Damodar Modi must not only work very hard, but he must also work intuitively. His soul must vibrate to the soul of India. And the soul of India is something different from, and I make bold to say this, different from what the Sangh Parivar thinks it is. Swami Vivekananda understood the soul of India. The fact that Sri Narendra Modi meditates on the Vivekananda rock, memorial rock, doesn't mean that he is at one with Swami Vivekananda's vision or he shares his spirit. Maybe far from it. So, I wish the Prime Minister well. I admire his prodigious capacity to work. At the same time, I also hope and pray that he may not lose sight of the oxygen flow that needs to go into not just the brain but every cell of the body politic of India, the oxygen of love, the sense of oneness, which determines the worth of every Indian. I also pray that the subtle things of life, like what I learned from what happened to my passion fruit plant, its need for companionship, its thirst for union, communion, and communication. Even today, I sit and wonder what all things did my passion fruit plant and this wild creeper, as they grew up together, entwining around each other, what all stories did they say to each other? What all little poems did they cite to each other's great delight and entertainment? What all little talks of love did they whisper into each other's ears? What all dreams, what all aspirations? Did they share each other's heartbeat? Did they caress each other? Did they say, look, for all the differences that we have on the surface, end of the day, the same life principle works, flows through you and me, and therefore we are one because of the ultimate oneness of the whole of creation. What all did they say and what didn't they say? See, Narendra Damodar Modi. Life is not a matter of force alone. Iron by itself will not ensure the greatness of India. We are not in the Iron Age. Far more than these mighty things of life, it's the subtle, small little things that make all the difference in the world. Let me share with you an episode from the Bible. There is a prophet called Elijah in the Bible, in the Old Testament. Elijah wants to get a vision of God. He's in a desperate plight. He fears for his life. He's running away from the queen who is plotting for his death. He's alone, miserable, lonely, full of fear. And so, praise to God that God may reveal himself to the prophet. So then comes a great earthquake. And Prophet Elijah thought God was in the earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. Then came thunder and lightning. The prophet said, God must be in this thunder and lightning, because that's how traditionally God revealed himself. But God was not in the thunder and lightning. Then there was a great storm. God was not in it. There was a great blaze, great fire. Prophet said, surely God is in this blaze. Tremendous, terrible, and fascinating blaze. But God was not in the blaze. After all that, there came a still small voice. God speaks to us, not necessarily in thunder and lightning, not necessarily the deafening roar of the storm, not the spine chilling earthquake that makes even the bravest melt in fear. God speaks to us in the still small voice. But if you're too busy to listen to it, you'll miss it. And if you miss it, you'll miss the bus of history. May that not happen. No, no. May that not happen. And I pray this for the sake of my country. Thank you. Jai Hind.